The Christmas lights twinkled faintly in the distance, their colors reflecting off the frosted windows of our family car. I was only 15 then, still clumsy in my movements, still a child who thought the world could never collapse in a single evening. My sister, Emily, sat beside me in the back seat, scrolling through her phone with that smug, self-important look she always wore when she knew she was the center of attention. She was 17 now, the golden child, the apple of my parents' eye. That night was supposed to be nothing more than a simple family dinner, a memory added to the collection of ordinary teenage years. But memories have a strange way of twisting into nightmares, and sometimes, they get rewritten by the people who claim to love you most. "Buckle up," my dad called from the driver's seat, his voice half stern, half distracted. "We don't need anyone getting hurt tonight." "I am buckled," Emily snapped, rolling her eyes dramatically. "God, Dad, stop treating me like a child." I chuckled under my breath, which earned me a sharp glare from her. "What's so funny?" she hissed. "Nothing," I muttered quickly, sinking back against the seat. It was icy that night. The roads glistened under the street lamps, a thin layer of frost making every turn dangerous. My mother sat in the passenger seat, humming along to a Christmas carol playing softly on the radio, blissfully unaware that her family's world was about to be torn apart. We never made it to dessert. Somewhere along the winding road home, Emily demanded my dad stop by a convenience store. "I need something sweet," she insisted. "Come on. It's just one stop." My dad sighed but gave an A like he always did with her. We pulled over at the small corner shop, its neon light flickering against the cold night. Emily shoved her phone into her jacket pocket and unbuckled her seat belt. "I'll come too," I said, already halfway out of the car. "No," she snapped, turning to glare at me. "Stay here. You'll just slow me down." I froze mid-step, the words stinging more than they should have. Before I could respond, she slammed the door shut and stormed inside. I stayed in the car, pressing my forehead against the cold window, watching her figure disappear into the shop. Minutes later, she returned, clutching a bag of snacks and a soda. I noticed, though, her steps weren't steady. Her laugh was too loud when she opened the door. She smelled faintly of something I couldn't quite place in something sharp, bitter. Not like candy or soda. "Move over," she demanded, pushing me to the side as she slid back into the seat. "God, you take up so much space." I frowned but didn't argue. She twisted the cap off her soda and took a long sip, sighing with exaggerated relief. The crash happened less than 10 minutes later. I remember it in fragments, like shattered glass pieces that never fit back together. The car skidding, Emily laughing too loudly at something on her phone, my dad yelling her name, my own scream echoing in my ears, and then darkness. When I opened my eyes again, the world was sirens and flashing red lights. Cold air burned my lungs as strangers pulled me out of the car. My leg hurt, my head spun, and all I could hear was Emily crying, her voice sharp, desperate, filled with fear. "She pushed me," she wailed. "She distracted Dad." "It's her fault." I froze, confused. What was she talking about? I hadn't pushed her. I hadn't distracted anyone. I barely moved, but my parents believed her instantly. My mother's face, pale under the ambulance lights, turned toward me with horror. "How could you? After everything, she could have died." I didn't. My voice cracked, but they weren't listening. Even those paramedics strapped me onto a stretcher. I saw the looks on their faces. Not worry, not love, blame. That was the night the accident wasn't just about broken glass and bent metal. It was the night my role in the family changed forever. From that moment on, I wasn't the child they loved. I wasn't their daughter. I was the villain in their story, the one who had ruined everything. The weeks after the accident blurred into one endless stretch of silence and sharp words. Our house, once filled with laughter, became a place where I walked on glass. Every sound I made seemed too loud, every movement too suspicious. My parents barely spoke to me except to remind me of what I had done. Emily, wrapped in casts and sympathy, sat like a queen in the living room. Flowers arrived from neighbors and friends, cards poured in, and visitors came bearing gifts. Everyone fussed over her. She wore her injuries like a crown, her fragile smile making her look saintly to everyone but me. And me? I was invisible. No, worse than invisible. I was the shadow in the corner, the reminder of the family tragedy. Don't bother your sister. Mom would snap whenever I tried to ask Emily if she wanted anything. You've done enough, Dad would add, the bitterness in his voice like acid against my skin. I tried to tell them, more than once, that I hadn't caused the accident, that I never touched her. Never distracted Dad, but my words bounced off them like stones against a wall. Stop lying, Mom hissed once, her eyes blazing. Do you know how much pain you've caused her? How much you've cost us? The word cost burned. It wasn't just about the accident, it was about money, hospital bills, and lost sleep. And in their eyes, I had written the bill and handed it to them. The black sheep. As the years passed, the narrative hardened. Emily recovered physically, but the accident became her permanent shield. Every time she failed, every time she messed up, the story of what I had done resurfaced as her excuse. She didn't make the volleyball team. Well, you know, ever since the accident, I just can't perform like before. She'd sigh, earning sympathetic pats on the back. She failed a class. I struggle with concentration. It's not my fault. My sister ruined things for me. People nodded, comforted her, whispered about poor Emily, and I was there, the silent villain, pretending not to hear. Even extended family took sides. At Christmas dinners, uncles and aunts would look at me with that unspoken judgment. She's the one who caused it, their eyes seemed to say. I sat through it, swallowing the bitterness, a smile plastered on my face. Achievements mean nothing. I tried so hard to earn their forgiveness. Straight A's in school, scholarships, awards, and nothing mattered. When I brought home certificates, Mom would glance at them and say, "That's nice," before rushing back to tend to Emily's needs. When I graduated at the top of my class, Dad didn't even show up. He was at one of Emily's checkups, holding her hand as though she were still fragile porcelain. At night, I would cry into my pillow, muffling the sound so no one could hear. Guilt gnawed at me, even though I wasn't sure anymore if I'd done anything wrong. Maybe I had distracted Dad. Maybe I had ruined everything. They repeated it so often that it became my truth. Emily's quiet cruelty. Emily knew. She knew the power she had. Whenever my parents weren't around, she would lean close and whisper, "Everyone will always see you as the bad one," or, "Thanks for making me special. You'll never be loved the way I am." Her smile was sharp, wicked, and when Mom or Dad walked back into the room, she'd soften instantly, blinking those innocent eyes, becoming their perfect daughter again. It was a performance, and I was the audience trapped in the front row. A growing seed of doubt, but still, deep in my chest, something wouldn't let go. A seed of doubt, tiny but insistent. I replayed that night over and over in my head. The icy roads, the soda in Emily's hand, the sharp smell I couldn't identify then, the way she laughed too loudly before the crash. What if the story wasn't what they said it was? But every time I started to question it, guilt drowned me again. Who was I to doubt my family? Who was I to go against the truth they had written for me? So I carried on, through high school, through college, through my first job. 11 years of walking in the shadow of blame. 11 years of silence. 11 years of living a life that wasn't mine. And then, one ordinary afternoon, while searching for an insurance document, I stumbled on something that changed everything. A yellowed envelope, sealed, stamped with the words, "Police report A do not discard." And in that moment, I realized my life was about to split open again. The envelope was wedged between stacks of tax files and insurance papers in the back of my parents' home office cabinet. It was dusty, the paper yellowed from years of neglect. I wasn't looking for anything more than an old car insurance record that day. I was visiting out of obligation, the kind of dutiful stop children make when they're still tethered to family despite years of pain. But when my fingers brushed over the words "Police report A do not discard," my heart froze. For a moment, I just stared at it. My pulse thundered in my ears. I knew what it had to be. What else could it mean? Hands trembling, I pulled it free. The seal was still intact, though the glue had grown brittle with time. I should put it back. I told myself I should never touch this. But my curiosity, the tiny seed of doubt that had been growing inside me for 11 years, sprouted like wildfire. I broke the seal. The first page, the report began clinically, with dates, times, officer names, but as I read further, the sterile words cut deeper than knives. Driver lost control of the vehicle on icy conditions. Cause: reckless behavior of rear passenger, later identified as Emily. Last name, witness accounts and breath test confirmed passenger had consumed alcohol prior to incident. My breath caught in my throat. Alcohol? Emily? My eyes darted across the page. Desperate, frantic. There it was again. Passenger displayed signs of intoxication. Empty vodka miniature bottle recovered from passenger's jacket pocket. The room tilted around me. My chest burned as though all the oxygen had been sucked away. For 11 years. I had carried the weight of that night, convinced that I had caused it. 11 years of whispered blame, of cold shoulders, of being branded the villain. And all along a broken bar it was her. The cover-up. The report detailed more than I ever imagined. My parents had been contacted at the hospital about the findings. The officer recommended that Emily be charged with underage drinking and endangerment. But my parents had begged, pleaded. Our daughter has suffered enough. Please don't destroy her future. And so, in exchange for a quiet agreement, the truth had been buried. The official report was sealed away, hidden even from me and their other child. But it wasn't just hidden, it had been twisted. They had deliberately shifted the blame onto me. They had pointed to me as the distraction, the careless one, the cause of Emily's suffering, and the world had believed them. I dropped the papers onto the desk, my hands shaking violently. I felt sick, like my stomach had turned to stone. 11 years of guilt, 11 years of lies. The betrayal. Memories came flooding back like shards of glass. Emily's cruel whispers, my mother's sharp words, "Stop lying, you've done enough." My father's cold indifference at every one of my achievements. They had known, they had all known. Tears blurred my vision. Not the quiet, hidden tears I had shed in silence all those years, but hot, furious tears of rage. My parents hadn't just failed me, they had sacrificed me. They had thrown me into the fire to protect Emily's reputation, her spotless image, her gold child pedestal. And Emily, she had let me drown in guilt, day after day, year after year, smiling sweetly to the world while whispering daggers into my ears. I pressed my fists against the desk, trembling with fury. My entire life, my identity, my worth had been warped by this lie. And for what? So Emily could go on being perfect? So my parents could preserve their shiny family image while I rotted inside? The spark of revenge. As I gathered the papers back into the envelope, a new feeling began to bloom beneath the heartbreak and fury. For the first time in years, I felt a clarity so sharp it almost scared me. I wasn't the villain. I wasn't the reckless child who ruined everything. I was the scapegoat, and they had chosen me as their own daughter to bear a punishment they never deserved. My hands steadied, my breathing slowed, my tears dried into something colder, harder. They thought I would never know. They thought their lies would bury me forever, but the truth was in my hands now, and I would make sure they choked on it. For the first time in 11 years, I wasn't drowning in guilt. I was rising in fury, and I knew exactly where this was going. When I slid the sealed police report back into the envelope, I felt both lighter and colder than I had in years. The office smelled of old paper and lemon-scented cleaner, the same scent that clung to our home like a promise of normalcy. Normalcy had been a lie in this house, a stage carefully lit for Emily, and now I held the script that proved it. I didn't call, I didn't yell. I wrapped the report in brown paper like a gift and drove home with a calmness that surprised me. The drive was quiet, the window cracked an inch to let the night air in. For the first time in 11 years I didn't rehearse apologies or prepare excuses. I felt only planning, slow, careful, precise. When I walked into the kitchen, my mother was at the sink, her hair in its old curlers, humming that song she always hummed when she wanted to pretend everything was fine. My father read the sparse section as if he could read his way back into a life where appearances mattered more than truth. Emily sat at the table with a textbook open, casting the practiced wounded glance at anyone who looked her way. "Dinner's almost ready," Mom chirped, and then, with a softness that made my skin prickle, "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" She used the word like a bomb, like she always had to everyone but me. I set the envelope on the counter. It made a small sound, paper against wood, and both Mom and Dad looked up. Emily's head tilted with the curiosity of a stage actor noticing a new prop. "What's that?" Dad asked, casual, then adding the little distance that everyone had assumed I wanted. "It's just some old files," I said. My voice was low, Unflappable. Insurance stuff I found, thought I should sort them. Mom's smile was automatic. That's good. You're so helpful. I slid my hand under the paper and, with a motion so quiet it seemed like the room itself held its breath, I unfolded the first page. The words stared back at them like a verdict. I watched the faces in the circle of our kitchen, a first confusion, then recognition, then denial, like watching a video run backwards until it couldn't. What is that? Mom's voice was high, fragile. I let the silence settle. It's the police report from the night of the accident. It hit my words like a small explosion. For a second there was nothing but the refrigerator humming and the tick of the clock. Then my father pushed his chair back hard enough to scrape the floor. You can't, he began. You hid this. My voice didn't shake. There was no pleading in it, there was only a precise, quiet fury that made the words heavy. You hid it for 11 years. Mom's hands flew to her mouth. We did what was best for Emily, she said. The rehearsed line she had used in mourning and protection. We didn't want to ruin her future. By ruining mine? I asked. The sentence came out sharper than I'd expected. By making me the villain in your stories? By letting the world hate me so she could be the fragile one? Emily's eyes darted away. Her fingers fiddled with the band on her wrist, a nervous tick I had noticed years ago and she had never let go of. Her face was the same one she had when she wanted pity. Small, injured, luminous under the family lamp, but now the light showed lines that had been drawn in collusion with others. I saw strategy in those eyes, and something else I hadn't expected, a fear. Dade's voice was low and dangerous. You don't understand everything. Then tell me, I said. Tell me what was more important, Emily's reputation or the truth? Because the report says she drank. It says there was an empty vodka bottle in her pocket. It says she was intoxicated. It says she acted recklessly. For a moment they looked like children caught with sweets in their hands. My mother's face crumpled, not from contrition but from panic at the exposure. My father's jaw set, that old, familiar hardness of someone who'd made a decision and lived with it by pretending it never mattered. Emily's mouth opened and closed. You don't know what you're doing, she whispered. You can't. I can, I answered, because I found the truth. Her laugh was brittle. So you found a paper. What's that going to change? Her eyes flickered to Dad, pleading for rescue the way survivors do in a practice play. It changes everything, I said, because I'm not going to let 11 years of lies stand. I'm not going to let you keep telling stories that make me small so you can stay big. Dad slammed his palm down on the counter. You will not go around making accusations. This is family. We don't air this in public. No, I said, and, because bravery without action is still a trap. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I've already scanned it. I made copies. I spoke to a lawyer. I'll share this with anyone who needs to know the truth. Your choice is to tell the truth voluntarily, or I will. The room shifted. Mom started to sob, real sobs, ragged and loud, the kind that sounded like excuses. She moved towards me, hands outstretched, but I stepped back. This isn't a private confession, she said. It was for her good. For whose good? I asked. Yours? Hers? Yours. Built on lies? She couldn't answer. None of them could. They had propped up their story for so long that answering would mean admitting a betrayal on a scale I'd only begun to understand. You can't do this, Emily said again, more helpless than threatening now. If this gets out, if it gets out, my voice rose despite me. It will get out. The people who believed you, who pitied you, who made my life unbearable, they will know. My friends. The teachers who whispered behind my back, my co-workers who treated me like a problem, all of them. But this isn't just about reputation. It's about the truth. I deserve that. None of their protests could match the steadiness in me. There was a power and certainty that no amount of pleading could pull down. It wasn't vengeance for vengeance's sake. It was reclamation. They didn't give up easily. There were frantic calls, whispered conferences behind closed doors. Dramatic collapses at family gatherings meant to make me look cruel for not taking care of the broken girl. There was the subtle gaslighting that had been part of my life for so long. You're being dramatic. You're looking for attention. Maybe you're making this up. But I had a report and I had a plan that wasn't meant to destroy but to reveal. First, I contacted a trusted family friend I had known since college, someone whose judgment I valued and who wasn't entangled in my family politics. She read the scanned report and sat with me under her porch light as the night deepened. "You have to be careful," she said, "practical, kind. They'll try to discredit the document, to say it's altered. Get the original to a lawyer, get it notarized, get witnesses." I did exactly that. I found a lawyer who treated the case not as a spectacle but as a wrong that needed remedy. He explained calmly that the report, as official documentation, had weight. The lawyer advised no impulsive social media storms, no dramatic reveals at the dinner table. "Make it undeniable," he said. "Make it factual." So I made it surgical. I compiled the report, the chain of custody of the document, which, unexpectedly, proved that it hadn't been legally expunged but had been tucked away, and the accounting of the officer's recommendations that my parents had suppressed. I sent copies to a small circle, a retired teacher who had always quietly defended me in the background, an aunt who had been distant but fair, and a cousin who worked as a journalist and owed me a favor. The response was immediate but measured. The teacher, hands trembling as she called, promised to stand by me. The aunt said nothing at first, but her silence felt like a shield. A cousin asked for time, then later sent a text. "This needs to be public. People should know." When the first article hit, they tried to spin it. "Family dispute," said one headline. "Sibling quarrel," said another. But the journalist cousin had done his job thoroughly. He presented the facts, the report, the sealed officer's notes, the history of the hush, interviews with professionals who explained the long-term effects of scapegoating and covering up dangerous behavior. The story read like a slow, unspooling truth. Suddenly, our perfect section 8 cracked in public. Neighbors who had once sent casseroles to my mother called me with apologies. A teacher who had once acted distant came forward to say, with regret, that he had always suspected something was off. An old classmate sent a message. "I always wondered why you were so quiet about it. I'm sorry." The house that had once given Emily shelter for her performance now let the cold in. Her social circle shrank as those who had once patted her gently now felt duped. People who had rushed to comfort the injured child began to ask questions they had been too polite to ask before. Titles of sympathy were stripped from her shoulders like old cloaks. I won't pretend that it was immediate catharsis or that everyone's eyes turned to me with guilt. Some stood on the sidelines, suspicious that I had orchestrated a drama for attention. Some defended my parents, saying everyone makes mistakes. And, yes, there was the glut of messages from people who loved Emily and now felt betrayed and heartbroken and wanted answers. The slowest, sharpest part was watching my parents try to piece back a life that self-imploded. My mother, who had always defined herself as the protector, now had to face the fact that her protection had been a lie. She cried on television interviews and gave stilted explanations that never quite matched the facts. My father, whose pride had once been a shield, retreated into silence that said more than any apology could. Emily, for her part, reacted in a way that revealed how much of her persona was curated. She lashed out at first, denying, then bargaining, and finally shrinking into a numbness I recognized as shame. People stopped bringing flowers to our front door. They stopped asking how she was. She sent messages begging me to stop, to forgive, to help her salvage something from the ruins. I read them, sometimes late at night, the words like small knives and tiny confessions. "Please," she wrote once. I panicked. I was scared. I didn't want to lose everything. There were nights I wanted to reply with equal cruelty, to tell her exactly how she had wasted 11 years of my life. There were nights I imagined the most exquisite revenge, to make her feel that smallness, that hunger for forgiveness, but I had a different idea of justice now. Sweet revenge for me was truth served plainly, consequences allowed to do their work, and a life rebuilt on honesty. So I answered once, in a way that surprised both of us. "I found the report," I wrote. "You were hurt. I don't want you to suffer more than anyone already has, but I will not be your scapegoat again. Tell the truth. Let them know you were wrong. I will accept an honest apology or silence. I will not be humiliated to feed your image." It wasn't compassion that moved me, it was a clear boundary. I would not allow my life to be collateral damage. Months passed. People's attention moved on, as it always does, but the small, Real shifts stuck. My parents' friends began to avoid them. At family gatherings there were awkward silences and thin smiles. I stopped attending some of them. At first I felt guilt at the old conditioning, but that guilt was different now. It was earned and therefore manageable. Not the blind, crushing weight of a guilty conscience for an imagined crime. With the truth out, I found a strange luxury. Space. Space to breathe without rehearsing repentance. Space to build relationships outside the web of my family's manufactured narrative. I reconnected with old friends who had checked on me quietly through the years. We talked for hours about things that had nothing to do with damage and blame. Good books, small joys, plans as reckless and thrilling as a weekend trip. I found hobbies again, the little things that root a person. A painting class that left paint under my nails for days. Hikes where the world smelled like pine and sweat and possibility. I also did something that felt like real reclamation. I started therapy. Not because someone insisted I was broken, but because I wanted to understand how someone could be taught to accept blame as truth. I learned the language for things that once felt like unexplained thorns. Gaslighting, scapegoating, family systems that rotate blame for convenience. Having words for those wounds didn't erase them, but it made them intelligible and therefore treatable. The final act of this chapter for me. The sweetest part of revenge was not a grand public spectacle, it was an internal coronation. One night, months after I released the report, I stood in front of the mirror in my small apartment. Outside, the city hummed with life I had missed for too long. I looked at my reflection and said, aloud and without apology, "You are not what they said you were." It was such a small thing. A line set into the glass, but it cracked something inside me that had been held together by fear and respect for authority. I felt lighter. Not whole. I don't pretend such long-stitched wounds close fast, but lighter in the way that a door left unlocked feels different. Previously dangerous, now simply open. When my mother called to beg me to come home for a family event, I declined. "I can't," I told her. "Not now." She asked for time. I gave it to her on my terms. She asked for forgiveness. I told her it would be considered, but only if she could be honest publicly and accept that she had chosen appearances over me. She never did that in the full way I wanted. She offered small apologies and private tears. My father sent a letter that read like a defense thinly veiled as remorse. Emily sent a photo of our old house one day at a tree in the yard in full bloom and wrote, "Do you remember when we used to climb it?" Nostalgia can be weaponized, and in that instant I understood how much of our shared past had been built on a lie. I didn't answer. 2 years later, we attended the same funeral, not of each other, but of an aunt. It was the kind of gathering that forces polite faces and brief condolences. Emily and I spoke in short sentences. There was no reconciliation, no dramatic makeup. There was a polite nod of acknowledgement. Time had rearranged things but hadn't healed everything. Some wounds did not want to knit properly, and I no longer tried to force them. What I did, instead, was build a life that didn't require my family's approval. I moved cities. I took a job that let me travel. I paid off debts that had been mine to begin with and bought a small apartment with windows that let in honest light. I dated people who treated me like a whole person. I met friends who loved me not because of a story that framed me as the villain or the saint, but because of late-night conversations, small favors, and the slow accrual of trust. And love, real love, found me in ways that sympathy never had. There was no dramatic wedding scene or cinematic apology. There were dinners with a partner who asked how my day went and meant it. There were quiet Sunday mornings where we made pancakes and laughed about small things. Those were the moments that, stitched together, created a life I'd been denied for 11 years. Revenge, I learned, wasn't always about making someone else suffer. It could be quiet and radical. The act of dismantling a lie and insisting on truth. It could be building a life so full and honest that the old story had no place to breathe. Sometimes I would see my family in pictures at a mutual cousin's wedding and feel briefly a flash of the old grief, but the sting was smaller now, wrapped in the knowledge that I had acted with integrity. I hadn't sought to destroy Emily, I had sought to reclaim myself. I didn't want to be the instrument of her downfall, I wanted the truth to be the teacher. Years on, if asked what revenge tasted like, I would tell them, it tasted like coffee in a tiny cup in a kitchen that belonged to me. like an honest laugh after someone asked a question I had never dared to ask aloud, like a police report folded into a file that no longer had the power to define me. At night, sometimes, I still woke up with the old guilt, a phantom limb of shame. But then I remembered the moment I opened an envelope, and in that instant of revelation I had chosen myself over the protection of a narrative that had almost consumed me. That choice had been my real revenge and my freedom.